The great chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living metal, and within its walls stood representatives from every corner of the known galaxy. 4,127 species had gathered here on Nexus Prime, the ancient heart of galactic civilization, to decide the fate of a small blue world called Earth. Ambassador Kethvoran of the Velithari Dominion stepped onto the central platform, his 6 legs clicking against the crystalline floor as he raised his speaking appendages to address the assembly. His scales shimmered with the deep purple of formal authority, and his voice echoed through the chamber like rolling thunder. "Fellow members of the Galactic Conclave," he began, "we gather today to address what our scientists have named the Terra Question. For 12 of their years, the humans have possessed faster-than-light travel, and in that brief time, they have already shown themselves to be the most dangerous species we have ever encountered." A murmur rippled through the gathered delegates. The Morketh Collective, ancient beings of living stone who had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations, leaned forward with interest. The Trillis swarm buzzed in their sealed environmental pods, their hive mind already analyzing the implications. The graceful Eldari, whose pacifist philosophy had guided galactic law for 10,000 years, exchanged worried glances through their silver eyes. Kethvoran activated the holographic display, and images of Earth filled the chamber. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds, and beneath them, 7 billion humans going about their chaotic lives. "Observe their history," the ambassador continued, his voice growing darker. "In just the last century of their development, they created weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and they pointed these weapons at each other. They split the atom not for energy or exploration, but for war. They burned their own cities, gassed their own people, and committed horrors that made even our most violent ancestors seem peaceful." The images shifted to show human conflicts, soldiers charging across muddy battlefields, cities reduced to rubble, mushroom clouds rising over distant horizons. The delegates watched in growing horror. "And yet," Kethvoran said, raising one appendage dramatically, "this is not why I call them dangerous. Many species have violent histories. What makes humans terrifying is their ability to adapt." He showed new images now. Humans living in frozen wastelands where temperatures dropped below what most species could survive. Humans dwelling in scorching deserts with almost no water. Humans building cities on earthquake zones and in the paths of hurricanes, refusing to leave even when nature tried to kill them. "They bond with predators," the ambassador announced, and gasps echoed through the chamber as images appeared of humans embracing wolves and large cats, of children playing with animals that could tear them apart. "They call these creatures pets and love them like family. They consume poison for pleasure," he continued, showing humans drinking alcohol and eating plants filled with capsaicin. Substances that would kill most species, they ingest recreationally and call it fun. "But most disturbing of all," Kethvoran said, lowering his voice so the entire chamber leaned in to hear, "is their capacity for what they call cognitive dissonance. They can hold 2 completely opposite beliefs in their minds at the same time and still function. They can hate someone and love them simultaneously. They can know something is wrong and do it anyway. They can believe in peace while preparing for war." The Eldari delegate rose, her silver robes flowing like liquid moonlight. "Ambassador, surely you exaggerate. No species can be so contradictory and survive." "I do not exaggerate, honored Eldari," Kethvoran replied. "I have studied them for 30 years. I have watched them survive disasters that would break any other species. I have seen them turn enemies into allies within a single generation. They are unpredictable in ways our models cannot account for, and they are spreading." He showed a map of human expansion. 12 years of FTL travel had already seen them establish colonies on 15 worlds, and their population was growing at a rate that alarmed every demographic analyst in the conclave. In 100 years, they will rival the Velitharian numbers. In 200, they will surpass the Morketh. In 300, if left unchecked, they could dominate half the galaxy. We cannot allow this. Grand Arbiter Yisseleth, eldest of the Morketh, and leader of the conclave for 6 centuries, raised her ancient stone hand for silence. The chamber fell quiet as her deep voice resonated through the crystal walls. Ambassador Kethveron proposes that we classify humanity as a developmental hazard under Section 47 of the Galactic Charter, she announced. This classification permits preemptive intervention, including military subjugation, technological seizure, and population management. The motion requires a unanimous vote to pass. She paused, her glowing eyes scanning the thousands of delegates who filled the chamber. Before we vote, does any species wish to speak in defense of humanity? Silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The humans had no friends among the stars, no allies to plead their case. They were alone, and they did not even know this gathering was taking place. Very well, Yisseleth continued. We shall proceed to the vote. All those in favor of classifying Earth as a developmental hazard and authorizing immediate subjugation, signal now. Across the vast chamber, appendages and tentacles and claws and wings rose in unison. The Velithari voted yes. The Morketh voted yes. The Trillis swarm voted yes. The Eldari, despite their pacifist beliefs, voted yes. Species after species, world after world, empire after empire, all voted to end humanity's freedom before it could truly begin. The final count appeared in glowing numbers above the chamber. 4,127 in favor, 0 opposed. The motion passes unanimously, Grand Arbiter Yisseleth declared. Humanity will be subjugated. Their technology will be seized. Their population will be managed. Their homeworld will serve the conclave. She turned to the military commanders who waited in the wings. Admiral Vorthax, you will assemble the combined galactic fleet. 50,000 warships from every member species. Proceed to the Sol system and secure Earth with minimal damage to infrastructure. We want the planet intact. The Admiral, a massive Velithari warrior whose scales bore the scars of 100 campaigns, bowed deeply. It will be done, Grand Arbiter. I estimate the campaign will last 6 standard rotations. The humans have only a handful of ships and primitive weapons. They cannot possibly resist. The chamber erupted in approval. Delegates congratulated each other on their wisdom and foresight. They had acted before the threat could grow. They had protected the galaxy from a dangerous new predator. They were heroes. None of them noticed the small maintenance drone that hovered near the ceiling, recording everything. None of them knew that a human spy had infiltrated Nexus Prime years ago. None of them suspected that Earth would receive warning of the coming invasion. And none of them, not even the wisest among them, could imagine how catastrophically they had underestimated the species they had just voted to enslave. The fleet departed 3 days later, 50,000 warships darkening the stars as they jumped toward a small blue world at the edge of the Orion Arm. They expected easy victory. They expected grateful submission. They expected to return as heroes. They were wrong about everything. The invasion came on a Tuesday morning, and the sky above Earth turned dark with alien warships. Admiral Vorthax had positioned his fleet perfectly, surrounding the small blue planet with a wall of metal and firepower that blocked out the sun itself. 50,000 vessels hung in orbit, like patient predators, and the humans below could do nothing but watch and wait. Earth's defenders tried to fight. They truly did. The United Nations Space Force launched every ship they had, 300 vessels crewed by brave men and women who knew they were flying to their deaths. They fought for 6 hours before the last human ship exploded in a flash of light. Primitive, Admiral Vorthax muttered as he watched the battle from his command throne. They did not even scratch our shields. The ground invasion began the next day, and it proceeded exactly as planned. Alien soldiers marched through the streets of every major city, and human militaries crumbled before weapons they could not understand. New York fell in hours. Beijing surrendered by nightfall. Moscow held out for 3 days before the last defenders were overwhelmed. Within 2 weeks, Earth belonged to the Galactic Conclave. Governor Threlix, a Velithari bureaucrat with 40 years of colonial administration experience, established his headquarters in the ruins of the United Nations building. He divided the planet into 12 governance zones, each controlled by a different conclave species, and he began the process of converting 7 billion humans into a productive labor force. The early days were quiet. Humans reported to work camps as ordered. They submitted to registration and classification. They bowed their heads and followed commands. The conclave administrators congratulated themselves on how smoothly the occupation was proceeding. Perhaps we overestimated them, Governor Threlix told his staff during a weekly briefing. They seem quite docile now that they understand their situation. Commander Vethsari, head of the Labor Authority, was not so certain. Something bothered her about the humans she supervised, something she could not quite identify. They worked hard, yes, and they followed orders, but there was a look in their eyes that made her nervous. They are planning something, she reported to the governor. I can feel it. Nonsense, Threlix replied with a dismissive wave. They are defeated. What could they possibly plan? He found out 3 months later, when his personal guards were found dead and his own weapon was pressed against his head by a 12-year-old human girl. The child had somehow stolen a plasma rifle from a dead soldier. She had taught herself to use it by watching recordings. She had waited outside his quarters for 6 hours without moving, without eating, without making a single sound. And when the moment came, she had acted with cold precision. Governor Threlix died before he could scream, and the girl vanished into the night like a ghost. Across the planet, resistance cells emerged from the shadows. Humans who had pretended to submit now revealed hidden weapons and secret plans. They struck at supply lines and communication centers. They assassinated officers and sabotaged equipment. They turned the occupation into a nightmare. Commander Vethsari could not understand how they organized so quickly. Humans who had been enemies for generations now worked together as if they had trained for years. Religious differences vanished. National borders meant nothing. Political disagreements were set aside. 7 billion people had become a single organism with a single purpose: freedom. They should be fighting each other, Vethsari complained to her superiors. Our psychological profiles predicted civil war within months. Instead, they are cooperating. How is this possible? No one could answer her question. The Trillis swarm faced their own problems, their hive-mind connection, which allowed them to coordinate perfectly across vast distances, began experiencing disruptions whenever they entered certain areas. They eventually discovered that humans were broadcasting something called heavy metal music on frequencies that interfered with Trillis neural links. They are using noise as a weapon, the Swarm Queen reported in horror. They found our weakness and exploited it within weeks. How did they learn so much about us so quickly? In the Andes Mountains of South America, a scientist named Dr. Elena Vasquez worked in a bunker hidden beneath 300 meters of rock. She had escaped capture during the initial invasion by pretending to be dead, and she had spent the last 5 months studying every piece of alien technology the Resistance could steal. Their systems are not that different from ours, she told her team. More advanced, yes, but built on the same principles. I think I can crack their communication encryption. She worked for 18 days without sleep, pushing her body past the point of exhaustion, driven by a cold fury that burned brighter than any fire. She had lost her husband in the invasion, her daughter in the camps. Her entire world in a matter of hours. She had nothing left but her mind and her hatred. On the 19th day, she succeeded. The quantum lock on galactic communications shattered under her assault, and suddenly humanity was not just fighting blind. They could hear everything, every order, every report, every secret conversation between conclave officials was laid bare. "They are bringing more ships," Dr. Vasquez announced to the resistance leadership. 50,000 more. They think it will break us. 3 months. General Marcus Chen, commander of the Unified Resistance, studied the intercepted communications with cold eyes. "How long until they arrive?" 3 months. "Then we have 3 months to prepare," the general replied. "Send word to every cell on the planet. We are going to give our visitors a welcome they will never forget." The Second Fleet arrived to find Earth transformed. What had been a conquered world was now a fortress. Every city was a trap. Every road an ambush. Every building a potential bomb. The humans had learned from 3 months of occupation, and they had prepared accordingly. Admiral Vorthax sent his soldiers into the streets, and they did not come back. He bombed resistance strongholds, and new ones appeared the next day. He threatened mass executions, and the attacks only increased. "They do not fear death," he reported to the conclave in bewilderment. "We kill 10, and 20 take their place. We destroy their homes, and they fight from the ruins. What kind of species refuses to surrender, even when victory is impossible?" The conclave had no answer. By the end of the first year, the occupation had become a disaster. Galactic casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Resources poured into Earth like water into a bottomless pit. The 6-rotation campaign had become an endless war with no end in sight. And in her bunker beneath the mountains, Dr. Elena Vasquez smiled as she listened to panicked transmissions from frightened alien commanders. They had come to enslave humanity, and humanity had shown them the true meaning of resistance. The breaking of chains had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Deep in the frozen darkness of the Kuiper Belt, where the sun was just another star among millions, humanity built its revenge. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the command deck of the converted asteroid that served as headquarters for the United Earth Navy, watching through reinforced windows as human workers and captured alien machines assembled warships at a pace that should have been impossible. In 2 years, they had gone from 300 vessels to 3,000, and the number grew every day. "They still do not know we are here," his intelligence officer reported. "Their sensors cannot penetrate the radiation fields we are using as cover. To them, this sector is empty." The admiral nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the distant stars. He had been a cargo pilot before the invasion, a peaceful man who transported supplies between Earth and the moon colonies. Now, he was humanity's greatest military commander, forged in the fires of occupation and tempered by loss. "Status of Project Prometheus?" he asked. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared on the communication screen, her face thin and tired, but her eyes burning with fierce determination. "Ready for deployment, Admiral. We have developed biological agents targeting every major conclave species. The Velifari variant attacks their respiratory system. The Morketh version disrupts their silicon-based nervous network. The Trillis strain breaks their hive-mind connection permanently. And the delivery systems? Missiles capable of reaching any world in the galaxy. We copied their FTL technology and improved it. Our weapons are faster than anything they have." Admiral Okonkwo allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had made a terrible mistake when they invaded Earth. They had brought their technology with them, and humans had learned from every piece of it. What took other species millennia to develop, humanity had reverse-engineered in months. "Begin Operation Reciprocity," he ordered. "It is time to remind the galaxy that actions have consequences. The first battle of the Liberation War took place above Mars, where a conclave supply fleet of 200 ships expected nothing but routine delivery. The human fleet emerged from hiding like wolves descending on sheep, and the fighting lasted exactly 14 minutes. The Velithari commander survived long enough to send one desperate transmission back to the conclave. They have ships, hundreds of ships. They came from nowhere. We are, then silence. News of the attack spread through galactic space like wildfire, and the conclave reacted with disbelief. Surely there was some mistake. Surely the primitive humans could not have built a fleet capable of destroying 200 warships. Surely this was exaggeration. Admiral Vorthax led a counterattack with 5,000 vessels, determined to crush the human rebellion once and for all. He found Admiral Okonkwo waiting for him near Jupiter, and what followed became known as the Battle of the Gas Giant. The humans did not fight fair. They used Jupiter's massive gravity well to slingshot missiles at impossible speeds. They hid ships in the planet's radiation belts where alien sensors could not track them. They pretended to retreat, drawing the conclave fleet into perfect kill zones. They broadcast fake distress signals to lure rescue ships into traps. This is not warfare, Admiral Vorthax protested over an open channel. This is deception. These tactics violate 17 galactic conventions. Admiral Okonkwo's response was cold and clear. You voted to enslave us. You killed our children. You burned our cities. There are no rules between predator and prey, Admiral. There is only survival. The Battle of the Gas Giant lasted 6 days, and when it ended, 3,000 conclave ships had been destroyed, compared to 400 human vessels. Admiral Vorthax himself was captured when human boarding parties stormed his flagship. The interrogation that followed provided humanity with complete knowledge of conclave fleet positions, base locations, and defensive weaknesses. The Admiral talked for 3 days straight, not because he was tortured, but because humans had developed a drug that made lying physically impossible. Primitive, Admiral Okonkwo remarked as he reviewed the intelligence. They called us primitive. The Liberation War entered its second phase as human fleets pushed out of the Sol system and into galactic territory. They did not conquer worlds or establish empires. Instead, they targeted the infrastructure that held the conclave together. FTL communication relays were destroyed, cutting off entire sectors from Central Command. Supply routes were disrupted, leaving occupation forces stranded without resources. Shipyards were raided and burned, preventing the construction of replacement vessels. Dr. Vasquez deployed Project Prometheus against worlds that refused to withdraw from human space. She sent warnings first, giving populations time to evacuate. But when the warnings were ignored, she showed no mercy. 3 Velithari colony worlds fell victim to the respiratory plague before their government finally ordered a full retreat from the Sol system. We did not want this war, Dr. Vasquez announced in a transmission broadcast across every conclave frequency. You came to our world. You killed our people. You tried to enslave our species. Everything that follows is your responsibility. Species began to fracture from the coalition. The Eldari, horrified by the violence they had enabled with their vote, formally withdrew from the conclave and declared neutrality. The Trillis swarm, their hive mind crippled by human bioweapons, retreated to their home systems and refused further orders. Smaller species simply surrendered, begging for mercy from the humans they had once voted to subjugate. By the 5th year of the war, humanity had not only liberated Earth, but had pushed deep into what had once been conclave space. They controlled trade routes and communication networks. They had turned the galaxy's own technology against it, and they showed no signs of stopping. Grand Arbiter Yseleth called an emergency session of the conclave, but fewer than half the member species responded. The great alliance that had once united 4,000 civilizations was crumbling, and at its heart was a simple, terrible truth. They had voted unanimously to destroy humanity, and humanity had refused to be destroyed. "What do we do?" asked the Morcath representative, his ancient voice trembling with fear. "They will not negotiate. They will not accept surrender. They just keep coming." Yisseleth had no answer. In 6 centuries of leadership, she had never faced an enemy like this. She had never imagined that a species classified as a developmental hazard could bring the mighty conclave to its knees. "We underestimated them," she said finally, "and now we will pay the price." The price, as humanity was about to demonstrate, would be higher than anyone could imagine. The human fleet arrived at Kethvor Prime, homeworld of the Velithari Dominion, on the anniversary of the Earth invasion, and Admiral James Okonkwo chose this date deliberately. He wanted them to remember. 12 years had passed since the unanimous vote, 12 years of war and blood and fire, and now humanity stood at the gates of the species that had led the campaign to enslave them. 100,000 human warships surrounded the planet, their weapons charged and ready, and the Velithari could do nothing but wait for the end. Ambassador Kethvorin, the same diplomat who had presented the Terra question to the conclave, stood in the ruins of his government's command center and watched the human fleet blot out the stars. His scales had faded to gray with age and despair, and his voice trembled when he spoke. "We are finished," he said to the few officials who remained. "They will destroy us as we tried to destroy them. It is only justice." But the destruction never came. Instead, Admiral Okonkwo broadcast a message to the entire planet. "People of Kethvor Prime, we have not come to massacre you. We have not come to enslave you. We have come to liberate you." The Velithari listened in confusion as the human admiral explained. The Dominion government had ruled through fear and oppression for 10,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species and forced them into servitude. They had built their empire on the backs of slaves. "Your leaders voted to subjugate humanity because that is what they do to everyone," Okonkwo continued. "But we are not like them. We will not become the monsters they tried to make us fight. Instead, we offer freedom to all who have suffered under Velithari rule." Human ships landed on Kethvor Prime, but they carried food and medicine, not soldiers and weapons. They established aid stations and communication centers. They broadcast messages of hope to the slave species that the Dominion had kept in chains for millennia. The Kethmari, small reptilian creatures who had served as domestic workers for generations, were the first to rise. They emerged from their quarters and walked to the human landing zones, expecting to be attacked. Instead, human soldiers handed them supplies and told them they were free. "Free?" asked one elderly Kethmari, her voice cracking with disbelief. "What does that mean?" A young human corporal knelt beside her and smiled. "It means no one owns you anymore. It means you can choose your own future. It means you matter." The Kethmari wept, and across Kethvor Prime, other slave species began to emerge. The Thornax, massive beings who had been used as laborers. The Silvertails, graceful creatures forced to serve as entertainers. The Deeplings, aquatic people who had been harvested for their bioluminescent organs. All of them came forward, and all of them found humanity waiting with open hands. Words spread through the galaxy like a shockwave. The humans were not conquerors. They were liberators. Every world they visited, every system they entered, they freed the oppressed and asked nothing in return. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic officer, traveled to dozens of worlds during the Long March. She met with species who had suffered under conclave rule for centuries, species who had been classified as developmental hazards themselves, species who had given up hope of ever being free. "Why are you doing this?" asked the leader of the Thornax Liberation Council. "You could have destroyed the Velithari completely. You could have taken their worlds for yourselves. Why help us instead?" Dr. Vasquez thought of her daughter, killed in the occupation camps. She thought of the millions of humans who had died in the invasion. She thought of the hatred that still burned in her heart whenever she looked at a Velithari face. "Because if we become what they are, then they have already won," she answered. "They called us dangerous because we adapt. They feared us because we survive. But they never understood what truly makes humanity strong." "What is that?" "We choose," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "We choose who we want to be. We choose what kind of future we want to build. And we choose to be better than those who tried to destroy us." The long march continued for 7 more years, and with each passing month, the conclave grew weaker. Former member species defected to humanity's growing alliance. Slave rebellions erupted on worlds across the galaxy. The great powers that had once ruled unchallenged found themselves surrounded by enemies they had created through centuries of oppression. Grand Arbiter Yusolith was captured when human forces finally reached Nexus Prime, the ancient heart of galactic civilization. She had refused to flee, choosing to remain in the conclave chamber, where she had called the vote that started everything. Admiral Okonkwo personally escorted her to the United Earth Tribunal, where she expected to be executed. Instead, she was placed in a comfortable room and forced to watch footage. For 30 days, she watched recordings of the Earth occupation. She saw humans herded into camps. She saw families separated, never to meet again. She saw children worked to death in mines. She saw old people left to starve because they were no longer productive. She saw every atrocity committed by forces acting under her authority. "I did not know," she whispered on the 10th day. "I authorized the subjugation, but I did not know it would be like this." "You did not want to know," replied the human guard assigned to her. "You looked away because it was easier. You pretended it was civilized because the alternative was accepting what you really are." By the 30th day, Isoleth could no longer speak. She sat in silence, tears of liquid stone streaming down her ancient face, confronting the full weight of what she had done. When human forces finally gathered the remaining conclave leadership, they found not armies preparing for a final stand, but delegations carrying white flags. Species that had once stood united in voting for humanity's enslavement now begged for peace. "We surrender," they said. "Please, show us mercy." Admiral Okonkwo looked at them with cold eyes, remembering Earth burning, remembering friends dying, remembering 12 years of war. "You voted unanimously to enslave us," he said. "And now, you will answer unanimously for what you did." The delegations trembled, expecting the worst. But humanity, as always, had something unexpected in mind. The Great Chamber on Nexus Prime had never been so quiet. The same crystal walls that had witnessed 4,127 species vote to enslave humanity now watched those same species stand in judgment, waiting to learn their fate. 15 years had passed since that fateful vote. 15 years of war and suffering and loss. And now representatives from across the galaxy filled the chamber where it all began. But this time, they were not the judges, they were the accused. The human delegation entered through the main doors, and every eye in the chamber turned to watch them. At their head walked President Elena Vasquez, the scientist who had broken conclave communications, who had created the bioweapons that brought empires to their knees, who had lost her family in the occupation and her innocence in the war that followed. She wore simple clothes, black and unadorned, without medals or symbols of rank. She needed no decorations to announce her power. Everyone in the chamber knew exactly who she was and what she represented. Admiral James Okonkwo walked beside her, his uniform crisp and his bearing proud. Behind them came the surviving leaders of the human resistance, men and women who had fought from the first day of the invasion to the last battle of the war. They had earned the right to stand in judgment over those who had tried to destroy them. President Vasquez stepped onto the central platform, the same platform where Ambassador Kef Voron had once presented the Terra question, and she looked out at the assembled species with eyes that held no warmth. 4,127, she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. That is how many species voted to enslave humanity. Not one voice spoke in our defense. Not one hand was raised in opposition. The motion passed unanimously. She paused, letting the words sink in. You called us a developmental hazard. You said we were too dangerous to be allowed freedom. You claimed you were protecting the galaxy from our aggression, and then you invaded our world, killed our people, and tried to break our spirit. The accused species shifted nervously. Some looked at the floor in shame. Others stared straight ahead, trying to maintain dignity in the face of certain doom. A few wept openly, knowing that whatever punishment humanity declared would be deserved. By your own laws, President Vasquez continued, by the very precedents you established, we would be justified in doing to you what you tried to do to us. Mass enslavement would be legal. Genocide would be permitted. We could burn your worlds and exterminate your peoples, and no one could say we were wrong. Grand Arbiter Yisseleth, standing among the accused, closed her ancient eyes. She had spent 30 days watching footage of what the occupation had done to Earth. She knew exactly what crimes had been committed in her name. She was ready to accept whatever justice humanity demanded. President Vasquez admitted, there are humans who want exactly that. There are voices in our own councils calling for revenge. They point to our dead children, and our burned cities, and our broken families, and they ask why we should show mercy to those who showed us none. She fell silent, and the chamber held its breath. I listened to those voices, she said finally. I considered their arguments. I felt the same anger and hatred that burns in their hearts. I lost my husband and my daughter to your occupation. I would be lying if I said I did not want vengeance. But then I remembered something, she continued. I remembered what you said about us. You called us dangerous because we adapt. You feared us because we survive. But the trait that truly terrified you was our capacity for contradiction. We can hold two opposite feelings at the same time and still function. She looked directly at Yisseleth, who met her gaze without flinching. I hate you, President Vasquez said. I hate all of you for what you did to my world and my people. That hatred will never fade. I will carry it until the day I die. But hatred is not all I am. I am also a mother who remembers holding her daughter's hand. I am a scientist who believes in building rather than destroying. I am a human who knows that some choices define us forever. She took a deep breath. If we enslave you, we become what you feared. If we destroy you, we prove you were right about us. Everything you said at that vote, every warning about human aggression and violence, would be confirmed. Your ghosts would whisper across the galaxy for eternity. We told you so. President Vasquez pulled a document from her coat and held it up for all to see. This is the new Galactic Charter, she announced. It was written by humans and aliens together, by former enemies who chose to become allies, by species who learned that cooperation is stronger than conquest. She began to read. Article 1. All sentient species are entitled to self-determination and freedom from enslavement. Article 2. No species shall be classified as a developmental hazard or subjected to preemptive military action. Article 3. All peoples shall have representation in galactic governance. Article 4. War crimes, regardless of when they were committed, shall be subject to justice. The chamber stirred. This was not the mass punishment they had expected. There will be accountability, President Vasquez continued. Those who ordered atrocities will face trial. Those who committed war crimes will answer for their actions. Reparations will be paid to Earth and to every world that suffered under conclave oppression. The old order is finished, and something new will take its place. She lowered the document and spoke from her heart. You voted to subjugate us because you feared what we might become. You were right to be afraid, but not for the reasons you imagined. We are not dangerous because we fight well, or adapt quickly, or hold contradictions in our minds. We are dangerous because we can choose. Her voice rose with power and conviction. We chose to fight when you invaded. We chose to resist when you occupied. We chose to liberate when we could have conquered. And now we choose mercy when we could have chosen destruction. That is what humanity is. That is what you failed to understand. We are capable of terrible things, and we are capable of choosing not to do them. She looked out at the thousands of species who had once voted unanimously for humanity's enslavement. That choice is called mercy. It is the greatest power in the universe, and we give it to you freely, even though you do not deserve it. Grand Arbiter Yusolith fell to her knees, tears of liquid stone streaming down her face. Across the chamber, other species followed, overcome by emotions they could barely understand. The new Galactic Charter was signed that day, and a new era began. Not an era of human dominance, but an era of cooperation and freedom and hope. 50 years later, a young Velithari historian asked an elderly human veteran why humanity had shown mercy to species who had shown them none. The old woman smiled and replied, "Because if we had become what you feared, then you would have been right about us all along." And across the galaxy, in 1,000 languages on 1,000,000 worlds, beings whispered of the humans who had chosen mercy when they could have chosen vengeance. They called it terrifying, not because of what humanity had done, but because of what humanity could have done and did not. That was the lesson that echoed through eternity. The greatest power is not the ability to destroy,